this video, we're going to take a look at how to create ships inside the command database. Now, ships are without a doubt the most complicated platforms that you can possibly run into when you're working inside the databases here. So doing this is going to be the exact same process that we saw with the other units. Basically, you're going to copy an existing ship and then make any copies or modifications to anything that you need to do. Our process is going to look a little bit like this. Copy the existing ship, populate the form fields, run a validation to make sure there's no mistakes here. It's worth noting that within these, you've got a couple teeny tiny pieces that are really important, such as cruise range and cruise speed. By changing these, you're actually going to have the computer calculate the exact amount of fuel we're going to need on board, which is going to make ourselves much simpler. After we run the validation, we get a report, we add the fuel, and run the validation report again. As soon as we've done all those pieces, then we can simply go ahead and start adding our engines, magazines, communications, mounts, which we've taken a look at before, docking facilities, aircraft, sensors, and then go ahead and validate it again, and then go ahead and complete the entire process. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go over to ships, and we're going to find ourselves a ship worth modifying. So we'll go ahead and pop over here. Let's see here. We'll keep this one nice and simple for our particular purposes here. Obviously, as the ship gets more complicated and it has more sensors and things like that on board, it's going to progressively make the whole process considerably longer and have more details that can potentially go wrong. All right, let's go ahead and look for an old OSA class and use that as the purpose for our modification here. So as usual, we're going to go ahead and type in OSA. We'll go ahead and concentrate on an OSA 2 if we can get our hands on it. Let's see here, Iraq, that sounds pretty good. We have the classic versions here. I believe the Soviet Union, yep, there, bingo, right there. So we're going to go ahead and remember a 134 there. We're going to go ahead and add-ins, command, copy entry, and now we have our new one, 3292. I'm going to disable our filter real fast, and then I'll go switch over to form view. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and go through the first step here. So our name here, we're going to keep this the same. We're going to say also UM, because it's the upgraded, modernized version. The Soviet Union is no longer with us here, so we're going to go ahead and switch this to Russia. We're going to assume this is going to be part of the naval fleet. Now, the year here, we're going to assume it's, let's say, 2004, and we'll say it comes out of service in 2025. Comments, naval vessel for testing. We'll say this is a hypothetical unit just for us. And now we can go ahead and define all these other features here. In this case, this particular version of our OSA is going to stay pretty much the same as we had before. Standard displacement we'll leave alone. Crew is going to come down just a teeny tiny bit here, not too. Troop capacity, again, this is if it's going to carry anybody on board. Cargo capacity is pretty minimum here. Missile defense is pretty much minimum. Maximum sea state repair capacity. It has no repair capacity, so we're not going to worry about that. Belt armor, we're going to assume that it's got just a teeny tiny bit of, again, some maybe lining and things along those lines, just to make it a little bit more durable here. Again, Kevlar works wonders. So we're going to go ahead and throw some of these different items here, and we're going to assume we got a little bit of protection again on our CIC here. So next what we can do is we can decide what category it is. In this case, it's a surface combatant. We can define what type it is. In this case, it is a fast, definitely. We can say its size, and this is how big of a pier we need. We can also define anything like engine armor as well as a rudder armor. In this case, so we'll make an assault rifle resistant. Nobody with a 12.7 millimeter gun will be able to be too successful here. So with that established, we're going to go take a look at all of our different items. Missile defense, sea state, cruise range, cruise speed. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a little complicated with this one. We're actually going to modify this one so that it's going to have a different type of range depending on what's going on here. So we're going to assume that we got ourselves a slightly more modernized engine, which is going to improve our performance by about 10% overall. So that's going to give us a 550. That's going to give us an 880. And that's going to give us a little bit higher. That's 1,980. Bingo. So now that we have made changes to this, so what's going to happen is this is going to cause a significant change to the actual calculations on board. You'll notice right now we're carrying a 7714 diesel fuel here. We also notice we have these engines which consume this particular amount of fuel. After we have run those particular values, typically what you want to do is you want to run the validator, which will then tell you exactly how much fuel you need to do on board. Before I do that, though, I'm actually going to make a copy of all my engines as well as my fuels so that any changes I make does not affect the other or I should say ships in this particular class. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my diesels real quickly here. I'm going to make a copy of them, and I'm going to make a note of what number they are. 2988. 2988. Go ahead and say modernized here, BM. All right, BM. There we go, looks good to me. So now we have some modernized diesels, 2988. I'm just going to remember the number 2988, don't forget. 2988. And diesel fuel, we don't actually know yet. So we're going to have that actually calculate for us thanks to the, like I said, the wonderful validator tool right here. So you can see I've got that brand new engine on there, so I don't have to worry about it. And like I said, our new engine was supposed to be a modernized engine. If we actually take a look at it, you can see its fuel consumption and everything along those lines will be internally consistent with whatever we have dialed over on this side. In this case, I can see my creep speed is always 5, and you can see that it's already kind of pre-calculated everything we have here. But again, until we run the validation tool, we're not going to know exactly what this number is. Let's go take a look at the validation. All right, our validation report is in, so now we can go ahead and take a look at some of the different options here. So for a particular ship that we're working with here, our ship is a 3292. So anything we're looking for here is going to be affected by that particular one. So what I'm actually going to do is change my source here. I'll go ahead and shut them all off. I'm going to be interested in anything to do with my fuel propulsion. I'm also going to be interested in anything to do with my ship here. So let's go ahead and take a look here. 3292. Now notice it has calculated our fuel for us to be 8486. That's wonderful. So now we can simply come over here and we can simply create a new fuel. So I'm going to go up to the tippy top here and go ahead and right click, database tools. I'm going to go ahead and make a quick little copy. By the way, we're on the wrong one. We needed 844. We had a totally different one selected here. It's been filtered. Let's go ahead and unfilter that real quickly. Go back to ship, go double click that again, and it should bring us right to 844. I'm going to go ahead and make a quick little duplicate. Now, one thing you want to watch out for is a lot of times another ship already has this particular value, so you can go back and actually track that one down directly. So again, we can take this to see if anybody else has a 7714, or actually in our case, we're looking for a fuel of 8486. So what we can do now is we can go look through all our capacities and see if that particular fuel already exists, 8486. In this case, it does, but for a much larger value. So I'm not going to worry about that too much. We're just going to go ahead and create our own version of it. So again, I'll go ahead and go back to ship, double click on my diesel fuel, go ahead and make a quick little copy, add-ins, command, copy, and we're simply now going to set this to the value that we got, which should be 8486, enter. So we have a slightly heavier version, and that is a 21118. Now note, if we knew the exact fuel consumptions of these diesels, we could actually come in here and change these diesels so that they're progressively more fuel efficient, in which case we'd have to carry a different amount of fuel on board. So we could actually come down here and we could say that our actual fuel consumption at this particular speed is supposed to be this, or this, or this, or something along those lines, and that would have a massive impact on that fuel calculation as well. In this case, I'm just going to be using that one in order to keep it a little bit simpler for us. And now we don't see anything here, but don't worry about it too much. We'll simply save it, close everything. We don't need our validation report anymore. We don't need to make any changes there. Go back to chips, and now you can see we're now correcting the correct amount of diesel fuel on board based on our modification to our cruise range. Again, we could have changed these diesels as well and not had to carry as much extra fuel. We would just have to be very precise about our exact fuel calculations that we're going to be doing here. All right, so that takes care of that part of things. So we've got the engines, we've taken care of the fuel. This whole process is now all set. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to be interested in adding any sort of engine changes. Now, in this case, I'm very happy with our engine. I'm not going to make any changes to it, even though we did make subtle changes. Now we're going to look at any sort of magazine changes. So the magazines on board this particular are pretty straightforward. We have an AK-230 30mm. It's basically a CIWS. This could be the time that we decide to make any changes to that. In this case, I'm happy with that particular magazine. I'm actually going to keep that exact system on board. I don't feel the need to change anything. If we wanted to, we could actually put some mines in here just to make things a little bit interesting for us. But again, if we wanted to create a magazine that held any sort of mines, we'd have to actually define that one and take the time to go ahead and generate it as well. So if you run into the values required issue, simply go ahead and put in a random item in here. For example, I'll put this one in, and then you can just go ahead and delete it if you need to get rid of it for the purposes of doing any sort of analysis. So I'm happy with that magazine. I'm not going to make any changes. So next we're going to look at communications. So our nice little OSA here is going to get a couple little upgrades here. First things first is we have our different radios that are all secure radios. We'll go ahead and also add in the capability to do some sort of satellite communications as well. So I'm going to type in generic, and I'm going to say generic SATCOM UHF. Again, just to give it a slightly better capability. This is our modernized version. Next, we're going to be looking at is adding any sort of mounts onto the particular ship that we're working on this particular case. We currently have a ton of different mounts on here. We have SSN 2B Styx singles. Now, for example, if we wanted to replace these with a more modern missile, we could go ahead and identify a mount that could do that. For our example, here we can just kind of scroll down a little bit. We'll see if there's anything too simple. We have a Sulfide here. We have a Siren Triple, which would be quite a nasty piece here. We could, of course, take a look at the different types. We could add a switchblade. In this case, a switchblade is going to be a little bit out on account of the fact that we will not be able to carry two in the spot that one would. However, what we can do is we can take advantage of one of the switchblades and then delete one of our existing mounts. So I'm going to go ahead and grab that one, and then I'm going to delete this one here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and grab the other switchblade mount and mount it on the other side instead. So in this case, we have two different sets of switchblades, and we're simply going to be using the twin launching versions of it. And we're just going to assume that they have the same space. I'm going to go down to this one. We don't need this one anymore as well. So now we've had an incredible upgrade on this particular ship. This one is now capable of carrying the switchblade anti-ship missile, which is a very significant upgrade for this particular ship. It's worth noting, by the way, that these two mounts might have a specific firing arc that we need to keep in the back of our heads. In this case, they can only shoot off the right here. So when we do go to design things, we need to make sure that the arc is an appropriate arc here. Otherwise, we're going to have some issues as far as getting that to behave properly. And you can see we have tons of different options as far as the descriptions. So this one can fire in pretty much any arc as long as it is only 2 degrees. Got it. Or 2 different dots, I should say. So the first one is actually perfect. The second one is actually perfect. Our arcs are completely reasonable. Everything's looking pretty good so far. So now that's been quite the upgrade for this particular one. So I'm happy with these mounts. We'll go ahead and take a look at our other options, which is going to be adding any sort of docking facilities or aircraft facilities. Now, since we're a small little OSA, which is a patrol craft, we do not have really room to put a heliport or anything along those lines. And we certainly could probably not account any sort of landing craft, so I'm not going to bother adding any docking facilities. If we wanted to, though, if we wanted to carry, let's say, a really small boat, we could probably select a small dock or anything along those lines, or even one of these little Davids, so we could have our kind of little ship's launch kind of a thing. The next item we're going to be taking a look at is aircraft facilities. Like I said, we don't really have enough room to put anything on board this little ship, so I'm not going to bother. And now we're going to take a look at adding any sort of sensors. Now, right now, we have a couple different types of sensors on board. We have a couple bell taps, we have a drum tilt, and we also have a square tie. So now let's go ahead and modernize our ship a little tiny bit here, and we'll go ahead and find some over-the-horizon radar. So we'll go ahead and do a generics, we'll do our search. We'll go down to here. We'll see what we can find as far as OTH. We'll do a quick little filter. Again, why this button is so helpful to have at the top of the screen. We'll type in OTH. Press the enter key, and let's see what we have at our hand. We have a bandstand. It's probably going to be my preferred unit here. We have the Titana, and of course, the Monolith. And we'll go ahead and do that 2 parts. So 5339 and 5334. 5339 and 5334. Nice. So we've added a very sophisticated element on board. One thing we do want to double check, though, is we want to see what the particular facings are for that particular radar system. So I'm going to press this, and I can see that it can detect in all directions. So I'm not going to bother stressing too much about that. So I'm going to go ahead and define the arcs for these to be everywhere. And now we are in business. And now we have a very sophisticated version of our OSA 2. At this point, you'd want to run the validation report again to double check to make sure you didn't miss anything as far as arcs that don't make any sense. And you'd also want to go ahead and test the unit to make sure it actually works in the program. Now, one thing we could do too is we could come down to our modifiers. Let's say that we've decided to shielded exhaust. Again, that would make not too much sense for something this small, but we could. Visual modification, we could go ahead and make this a low visibility. Perhaps we applied some camouflage to it. We could even put some modern shaping directly onto it to try to reduce the amount of detection that it can have. In this case, we'll say we made some modern changes to it. So that would complete our complete unit here as far as our ship goes. Keep in mind with ships, as you're starting to get more complicated, like we're going to do something with aircraft carriers, you can have a spectacular number of individual units that all must be done